DJ PK, and we're joined now by Tom Fornelli, college football writer and reporter for CBS Sports. Tom, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are we?
We're doing well. Here in these parts, Tom, we're trying to figure out who the big dogs are in the Big 12 in the second year of its current configuration. You got any ideas? Can you sort this out?
Let me get my random number generator out, and we'll see what it spits out. I mean, that is the story of the Big 12. I think that when you look at how things have broken down with, Texas and Oklahoma departing, and the additions coming in, there's a lot of good teams, but there also isn't much separation between those good teams. So it kind of leads to, a lot of for a neutral observer, I think it's fantastic because I can generally put on a Big 12 game and not be entirely sure what's going to happen. It kind of reminds me of the NFL in that aspect now. As far as, getting to the playoffs and winning national titles, it could be a problem.
Yeah, I agree completely. I'm just wondering if Yormark can sell depth. Is that a legitimate selling point when you're going up against at least the other two, if not the ACC also?
Yeah, I think what the Big 12 needs to do it's easier said than done, but it's not impossible. It's just you have to start winning marquee non-conference games regularly in the regular season. But we've seen teams do that in the regular season and still not really get that kind of respect when it comes to the rankings at the end of the year. So, you have to do that consistently. But then when you get to the playoff, if Arizona State had been able to pull off the win against Texas last year, that's a huge boost. But the fact that Arizona State was as competitive in that game with a very good Texas team should also be an indicator that, hey, you know what? Just because the league might not have the marquee blue blood program in it right now, the gap isn't as wide as maybe we all want to pretend it is.
Right.
And yet no one really talked about BYU getting in the playoff, and SMU gets in. And BYU went to SMU and won that big non-conference game you speak of and won it on the road, and yet at the end of the year that didn't matter.
Well, we like I said, we can't count all the regular season games. It's one of those things where it's like the results they only matter to a certain point. But you're right. If you looked at BYU, that win against SMU was huge on the road. But then there's also the fact that, you lose to Kansas and you lose to Arizona State at the end of the year. And I think that's one of those things, too, that is, whether it's fair or not, it's just the way the human brain works that, it's not only how many times you lose or who you lose to, it's when. So it's when the committee's sitting down and they're looking at BYU and they're like, overall, the resume is pretty good, but they've lost 2 of their last 4. They're not peaking at the right time. Even if that's not a conscious thought on anybody's head in that room, it's just the way we work. So it is so difficult unless you are already one of the accepted power programs to convince people that you are worthy of playing against those teams. And it's something that BYU and other Big 12 programs, and even if you look at, in the SEC last year with South Carolina, now obviously they had the head-to-head losses with Alabama and Ole Miss, which was really the clincher for them, but they also had better wins than Alabama and Ole Miss at the same time. So you could argue that they were more deserving in certain aspects. But since you aren't one of those premier programs, you don't really get looked at, or you don't get the same benefit of the doubt until you start doing it time and time again. So it's one of those things where, they talk about the change in the playoff format. And while I am kind of philosophically totally against the idea of automatic qualifiers, in an aspect to it, an automatic qualifier could make it far easier for a program like BYU or a program like South Carolina, or even if we go to the Big Ten, like Illinois won 10 games last year. They were never mentioned as a playoff candidate going down the stretch. If you just put these set parameters on it and a team meets it, you no longer have to worry about 12 people sitting around a conference table in a hotel room in Dallas trying to figure out whether you're worthy enough anymore. So it's one of those complicated factors where it's my initial reaction to automatic qualifiers is, ooh, that's disgusting, get that out of here. But then it's also but wait a minute, there might be some bonuses to it.
Along those same lines, Tom, does an automatic qualifier schedule, which is obviously what the NFL has, does that increase the ability to get better games earlier in the season instead of, or in the SEC playing maybe that last week not next last week where they play Akron or whomever, we can eliminate those games and have better non-conference matchups if everything is set and you just meet that criteria you're in?
I think there are different ways you can go about that. And I know I wrote my kind of like college football playoff proposal about a month ago on CBSSports.com. That was kind of like a blend of what we'd been hearing at the time, but also some ideas to kind of, enhance the regular season. And my thought process was if you came to an agreement with all the Power Four leagues where everybody plays 9 games, but then you also have an agreement where your 3 non-conference games include 1 Power 4 opponent, 1 G5 opponent, and then if you want an FCS opponent or another G5 opponent, you do it. But every single program to be eligible for the college football playoff has to play at least 10 Power 4 games. And I mean of Power 4 schools. Obviously, G5 schools and the independents can't do it. But Notre Dame, they do play 10 Power 4 opponents this year. It's not like it's that far out of line for them to do that. So that way Notre Dame doesn't get that special treatment. But the other aspect to it was the automatic qualifier spots are based on nothing more than your record in conference, which would mean that non-conference games are kind of a free roll, where if you are Ohio State, you could schedule Texas like they're playing this year, and if you lose the game, it doesn't impact your ability to make the college football playoff. But at the same time, if you aren't one of the automatic qualifiers and there's still the at-large spots in the field, because my proposal had a 16-team field, which is where I think we're going to end up eventually, even while the SEC and the Big Ten bicker about how to get there. But there would still be at-large spots, which would mean those non-conference games, even if they don't impact your ability to automatically qualify, winning them would be a huge boost to your resume if you don't get the automatic spot. So I do think there's a balance to find. And another possibility, which wouldn't really solve the non-conference aspect of it, so I don't know how the ACC and the Big 12 would feel about it, but if you just went to 10 conference games across the board, and if you had automatic qualifiers, that would just give you an extra marquee game every single year. It would take away the game against the FCS opponent that, fans don't really enjoy that much. And, TV networks don't enjoy it because nobody's watching those games for longer than a quarter most of the time. Right. So I think we're going to see something along those lines in the near future once we change this format. Which format they will take and how it will look, I'm not 100% sure. But I do think we're going to see them move to something like that.
Texas Tech famously spent millions of dollars of oil money bringing in transfers, and he did it in a hurry because new rules were coming in. Feels like those new rules are already breaking down. Is it still the wild, wild west with the NIL? Are they ever going to put their arms around that? Because I don't know how a court challenge stands up when you start limiting other people's money.
Yeah, nobody knows how it. There's been a lot of performance art when it comes to the NIL stuff with the government and everything in recent weeks. I have no idea how any of this works. And I think when I talk to coaches, I don't think they really truly understand how it works or what it's going to go. I remember we were sitting there, we were in Vegas for Big Ten Media Days a couple weeks ago, and we're actually in the middle of an interview with Wisconsin coach Luke Fickell when a new ruling comes down. So, we're sitting there talking about it. It's like, hey, we're asking him about NIL, and he says, because we didn't see it. He had just saw it before he came into the room. He's like, well, actually, that just changed 15 minutes ago, so I don't know what the situation is. I don't know what it's going to end up. I assume, and it might be a heavy assumption, that at some point we will get to a place where college football kind of gets that antitrust exemption that the pro leagues get, because the fact of the matter is that while we still call it college football and college basketball, it is becoming a professional sport. Whether we want to, just come out and say that out loud or not, that's just the truth of the situation. It's becoming a big business. So it might take a while. It might be ugly. It might be very confusing for the next, decade or so. But I think we're going to get to that point soon.
Okay, when we get to that point, then what are the conferences going to look like?
Who knows? I think that's something that's really hard to predict. My guess is, and this is just a pure guess, we could see conference realignment slow down a bit, but it's going to depend on what happens with the ACC in 5 years, because they announced that deal to where the buyouts for the schools in the ACC are going to get lower for the next 5 years, and then they are free. and what Florida State, Clemson, Miami do at that point, because you can argue they've got a pretty sweet deal. It's not just that their buyout goes down. They're getting that Texas deal that Texas had with the Big 12 for years, where they're getting a bigger piece of the pie than everybody else in the league because the revenue sharing in the ACC is going to be built around television ratings. So it could be financially feasible still for Clemson and Miami and Florida State to remain in the ACC at the end of this deal. We don't know what that's going to look like exactly, but when their new TV deal comes up, that's going to be a big part of it, because if you are the SEC and the Big Ten, I understand why the brands of those schools would appeal to you, but at some point you reach like a critical mass where I don't know how you're going to be able to squeeze more money out of television just because you've added yet more schools to your league. Like the Big Ten's already got 18 teams in it. Yeah. The SEC has 16, and they've got a lot of the best teams in the country as far as brand and television ratings are concerned already. So I don't know what adding a Florida State would really do to their television ratings to make networks say, you know what, we're going to give you a couple extra billion a year. So it's going to be really interesting to see. I think a lot of people are assuming that Florida State and Clemson are just headed for the ACC or the Big Ten or the SEC, but I don't think it's that set in stone. I think we could see a future in which the 4 leagues we currently have are the 4 leagues we have going forward, and they look largely like they do right now.
I hope you're right.
Do you think that these power schools, these brand schools that can really move the needle and jump leagues, do they look at other schools that have done it? Miami leaving the Big East for the ACC, that has not helped Miami on the field. You can have all the more money you want. It hasn't helped them win national titles. And now you look at USC, they go to Michigan, they go to Maryland, they go to Minnesota, and they lose all those games, and none of those teams were that good. It's not helping SC on the field. Does anyone ever consider that? Is there a point where they will?
I don't know. It depends on the check. I mean, I think that is the one thing that everybody is always considering, because I think when you're in charge at the time, and it's short-sighted, but if you're an athletic director or president at a school, you're not really thinking about what the guy who's going to replace you is going to have to deal with. You're just thinking, hey, I'm going to look at this. I'm going to put on my resume that I added an extra $20 million per year to our school's, budget. Mm-hmm. But to your point, like you mentioned, you mentioned what happened with USC. Look at Nebraska. What's happened to Nebraska since it left the Big 12 and it's gone to the Big 10? It hasn't won anything. Like, it was pretty good its first few years in the Big 10. It got to a Big 10 championship. But since then, they've been lost in the wilderness. Look at what Oklahoma last year. Like, this is a program that in the Big 12 was the dominant program for a while. They go to the SEC, they're suddenly a mid-tier conference program. And you look at how they're going to be this year, and I know there's some hype around, Mateer coming in, but I still don't think Oklahoma is going to be very good in the SEC this season. I just don't think they're strong enough on their lines of scrimmage to really deal with what they have to deal with in that league. So I don't know. I don't know if anybody kind of has that foresight and that thought process to really consider it, because there are, obviously, Oregon comes into the Big Ten, goes undefeated, wins the conference in its first season. SMU jumps to the ACC, gets to the conference championship in the playoff in the first season. It's not like there aren't success stories, but Mizzou was very successful when it first got to the SEC as well. And while it still had good seasons, it is not competing for SEC titles. So I wonder, if they care that much as they care about the bottom line. Like, obviously, everybody loves to win, but when you are the athletic director, you're not there forever. It's not like your relationship as a fan or an alumnus. You're just like, this is my job. I got to do the best part of my job while I'm here. So for most athletic directors, they're not working at schools they went to. So they're just sitting there thinking, this is the next step along my career to wherever I want to get to next. So I got to do this to get there. And unfortunately, we've seen the kind of impact it has had on, the college football and for its fans.
Your initial thought on getting 2 Big 12 teams into the playoff this year?
I think it's very possible. And my reason for this is I don't think the Big Ten is going to be that good this year. Like, the Big Ten got 4 teams in last year. Right. But if you look at that league right now, like, Penn State obviously is getting a lot of hype because they've got so many players back. Ohio State just won a national title, so it'll still be pretty good. But there are a lot of questions about Ohio State. We don't know who their quarterback is yet. We don't know who their running backs are. We don't know how they're going to replace a lot of those key players on defense. Now, the way they recruit, my guess is they'll be fine. But still, those questions exist. I think Oregon's going to take a slight step backward this year because this is the first time where they haven't, under Dan Lanning, had a 24-year-old quarterback. They're going back to the old-fashioned, hey, we've actually got a college kid playing quarterback for us. And they also have to replace key parts of their offensive line. They've already lost one of their top receivers in Evan Stewart for the year. So there's plenty of questions there. Michigan, listen, I think they were better than their 8-5 record last year, and the fact that they won 8 games, including beating Ohio State and Alabama with the quarterbacks that they had, is a huge testament to how talented that team was elsewhere. But while they've very likely improved at quarterback, they might take a step back on defense. And if they take a step back on defense, especially with their schedule, what kind of impact will that be? Indiana and Illinois, I know, are getting plenty of hype, but they're also still Indiana and Illinois. Are any of us going to be surprised if they finish 6-6? I'm not, and I say that as an Illini. I'll be more surprised if Illinois finishes 10-2 again than if they go 6-6. So I think if you are the Big 12, yes, there is definitely a path to getting 2 teams in, because you can have multiple 10-win teams in that league. And if you win enough non-conference games, like, for instance, Baylor's got that non-conference game against Auburn early in the year. I don't know how good Auburn's going to be, but if Baylor can win that and they're 10-2 and they lose the Big Ten championship game, you could still point to the fact that you have one of the best records in the country and you do have that SEC win in your non-conference schedule. So I think there is a path to it. It's just you need at least one team to truly separate. You need the really good team that's going to be in no matter what, and that way that maybe your Big 10 champion or Big 12 championship game loser still has a chance to get that at-large spot.
Do you think in this new era with money, the thing that was difficult in the old era was to be really good, elite in football and basketball at the same time? It happened, but only occasionally, right? Florida pulled it off briefly. Do you think going forward with the impact of money that schools can be really good in both sports at the same time, much more than they have been in the past?
I don't know. I mean, it's weird because, you think about it not just from a school perspective, but look at it from a conference perspective, where the SEC forever was great at football and did not care at all about basketball. They made all that money, and they really weren't investing it into their basketball programs outside of a few schools like Kentucky. But then at some point, Greg Sankey looked around and said, hey, you know what? All that money we're making, that we're, instead of building water slides in our athletic facilities, what if we start putting that into our basketball programs? We could probably be pretty good, and that'll help us earn even more money because you do get paid based on how many teams you put into the NCAA tournament. And we've seen them turn that around. Now, so from a school perspective, I think it's still possible. I think it could be, if there is a true, and again, as we discussed earlier, the rules are changing every other day. But if there is the true revenue sharing, as it was, where there's the cap where each team can only spend, or each school can only spend $20.5 million, and they have to divide it among their sports, I think it becomes far more difficult to be good at 2 sports. I think you kind of have to pick a lane. But if we're in this current landscape where you're still allowed to pay NIL and that doesn't count against your revenue sharing, well, maybe if you've got enough boosters to pay your football players, you can take that revenue share money and put that towards your basketball program and still be pretty good at both. So I think it's possible, but it's really going to depend on what the actual rules look like in the end.
BYU has put in a ton of money, and they've gone to great lengths to tell us that they're not the highest bidder, and they'll never be the highest bidder, and yet you look at their basketball program, and it just doesn't fit the profile of where we've seen BYU basketball with the players that they've had. So clearly something is going on. What is the outside perspective of BYU far away from where we are as far as them and money?
Oh, they're the highest bidder. I mean, that is the outside perspective. And I think, honestly, because let's be real, there's nothing wrong with it. I don't know why schools are so hesitant to say, yeah, we're doing it. We were the highest bidder. That should be an advertisement to all the other really good players out there. Hey, if you want to, make some money in college and also come to a program that's clearly trying to win and play at the highest level, look at us. We're trying to do it. But, yeah, I do think, you connect the dots. It's not that BYU has no history as a basketball program, but they don't have a tremendous history of getting the top talent in the country like the way they have been these last couple of years. So it's pretty clear what's going on there. Just own it. Be happy with it. Be proud of it. Nobody's looking at you like, oh, they're bad guys. It's all right, cool. BYU came to play now.
Yeah, that's what we've been saying. I think maybe the fact that it's a church school, so it's viewed somehow as a little tawdry. But we're sitting over here saying, hey, go for it, man. If you got it, spend it.
And I say this as a good Catholic boy. God forbid a church ever tried to make money. Nobody knows that's what they're ever trying to do. That's never been the goal for a church.
So is the SEC down in football now because everybody else has money? And let's be honest, we all thought they had money before the rules changed. Is it that simple?
I think you could simplify it to that. What I think the bigger problem the SEC faces is they used to be able to hoard all that talent. Like they would not only recruit it out of high school because of regionality and also the fact that, we're winning all these national titles. This is the best conference in the world, blah, blah, blah. But once the players got on campus, it was much more difficult for them to leave if they weren't playing right away because they'd have to sit out a year. Now, with the way the portal works and with the way NIL works, their depth is being taken in a way that it had never been before, to where, like, going back to Nick Saban at Alabama and what Kirby Smart did in building at Georgia, like their third stringers would start at a whole lot of schools across the country, but they didn't have a path to playing time on their own campus. Well, now those guys are going somewhere they can play, and you're seeing that kind of top-end talent spread out a bit more across the country. So when the SEC teams do suffer some injuries, which every single football team does, they don't have that monster waiting in the wings to just step right in and take their place. They've got an inexperienced guy who might have only been a 3-star, God forbid, a 3-star at an SEC school. What are you going to do? But I think that's been it. And I also just think more than anything, like the top programs at the Big Ten, Ohio State has always kind of operated like an SEC program, but the Michigans and the Penn States kind of didn't. And now they've added Oregon to the Big Ten, who is another program that had operated like an SEC program and even, has been importing SEC coaches to run their program. I think that it's a combination of the SEC having its talent thinned out by everybody in the Power Four, but also the Big Ten finally starting to step up to the plate. Because as we discussed earlier, like football schools, basketball schools, I talked about how the SEC wasn't really invested in basketball. Well, there were a lot of Big Ten programs who were far more invested in their basketball teams than they were their football teams, despite all the evidence that, hey, there's far more money to make in football right now than there is in basketball. But you have seen Indiana, you have seen Illinois, you have seen these programs start pouring far more resources into their football programs, which are just increasing the level of play in the Big Ten to where now everybody's kind of got to speed up and start playing more like Ohio State. So I think it's a combination of the portal rating the SEC of its depth and the Big Ten and other conferences taking more of an SEC approach to football.
He's Tom Fornelli. Tom, that was a great conversation. Thanks for coming on and talking college sports with us.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
Tom Fornelli, college football writer and reporter for CBS Sports. Stevenson Sylvester, former Ute linebacker, coming up at the top of the hour right here on The Zone.